We begin right now, though, with an escalation in the intensifying sex crime probe into MAGA Congressman Matt Gaetz. He is under investigation for possible sex trafficking and possible sex with a minor. He denies all allegations and has not been charged with a crime. Now, here's what's new tonight, right now. Here's why this is the top story. There are brand new reported signs that investigators are reaching a critical point with news that they're pressing for cooperation from two key witnesses. And one of them includes Gaetz' ex-girlfriend, who interned on Capitol Hill, according to a story first broke by CNN and confirmed by NBC News. A source with knowledge of the matter tells CNN that she traveled with Gaetz to that Bahamas trip in 2018, and that she was involved in some of the financial transactions, which reportedly the FBI has now obtained and is scouring for evidence of crimes. Another source saying the feds are, quote, nearly finished collecting evidence. Now, that goes to what they're learning and who they're learning from. Investigators are also waiting to hear more from Gaetz' indicted associate, Joel Greenberg, who has until Saturday to make a plea deal if he's to make one. I want to get right into this right now with Danya Perry, a former federal prosecutor from the famed SDNY, and Juanita Tolliver, Democratic strategist. And we have a lot more on another big criminal case, Rudy Giuliani, as mentioned, coming up. But when you look at all this, Danya, what do you see here in this phase with evidence and reports that they're going towards something?
Yeah, it looks like, as the report suggests, that they are nearing the end of the line here. We will see very soon if they provide Mr. Greenberg with a cooperation agreement. If they do, we will know that charges will be following from Matt Gaetz. They only will cooperate up. They don't seek, smaller targets. So that will be the reason for them providing him with a cooperation agreement. So even though it may take some more time to develop additional evidence, including perhaps this ex-girlfriend that you just spoke about, and time for public integrity, DOJ officials to sign off on it, it will be a very clear sign that that is where they're heading. And the development that you mentioned with the ex-girlfriend possibly cooperating is also significant, because Mr. Greenberg will not be enough. As we've seen, there's that gift-wrapped, bow-tied bonanza of evidence that includes this detailed confession by Joel Greenberg. It sounds like actual receipts from Venmo and other cash apps, and witness after witness. But it will be very useful to have someone like this ex-girlfriend who was on the scene, who will likely be sympathetic. She was a college-age student, I believe, at the time, and will likely have supportive and corroborative information, which will be very helpful, because no one's going to want to just take the say-so of Joel Greenberg.
Yeah, and we're in a reckoning here for the Republican Party. We have more on that later tonight, Juanita, but I don't know that on January 7th or 8th, people would have expected the party to be where it is, which is going much more towards the Gaetzes and the Trump fans and booting the Cheneys. Gaetz looked downright victorious, at least as a posture, if not a reality. We have some sound of him on this tour he did with Marjorie Taylor Greene in Florida. Take a look.
The reason they were repeating these lies and propagandizing my life is because I'm effective, because I stand in the way of an agenda that will hurt my fellow Americans. They will not silence me, we will not back down, and the truth will prevail.
Juanita?
The fact that Gaetz is out here on tour with conspiracy theorists is wild to me, Ari. He's acting as though he's not under investigation. He's acting like there's no evidence tying him to Greenberg, and as though he's going to emerge out of this unscathed, right? Like, I think it says a lot about the party. But to your previous point, Ari, about people being surprised about the direction party of the GOP, I'm not surprised. This is the same party that spouted Trump's lies well before the election, protected him in his lies in the 4 years he was president, and continues to give him footing and give his base the attention that they require in order to, in their mind, be successful in the midterms. But I'm really surprised to see Gaetz acting as though he's completely unfazed by this, especially if this is the same ex-girlfriend who previously it was reported that she didn't want to cooperate with federal investigators, but now she is. If he's not shaking in his boots about this and all the evidence coming at him, I don't know what's going through his mind.
Yeah, and a lot of the headlines and the allegations are bad. Whether they are criminally chargeable goes to the evidence. Danya, walk us through for viewers what's coming up in the next several days, because you've worked in the famed SDNY office. You're someone who's been on the inside of these situations when most people are on the outside. If it's a close case or they're trying to do their level best, they're not supposed to be out to get anyone for any reason. They're supposed to see whether they have sufficient evidence to charge crimes. In this case, some of the possible crimes are quite serious, but they also have a duty, of course, not to go beyond what the evidence shows. What would the next few days look like as they try to firm up what we're told is the end of that investigative process and the witnesses and the defendant mentioned?
Sure. Right now, Joel Greenberg is meeting day after day, no doubt, hour after hour with the federal prosecutors, doing what's called a proffer or a queen for a day, where he's immunized in part, but he is providing them with a full-throated, no-holds-barred account of everything he's ever done, everything that he's accused of in the superseding indictments that's already been filed against him, and everything else in his past. And if the prosecutors are satisfied that he has provided full and complete disclosure, and if they believe that he can help them support allegations against Congressman Gates, then they will finalize this cooperation agreement. They have a deadline of May 15th. And so that is no doubt what they're doing, while it seems at the same time pursuing other witnesses and trying to firm up the information that they're getting from Mr. Greenberg. So that's the next few days. And then, as I said, if we see that cooperation agreement, if he pleads guilty pursuant to that form of agreement, then almost certainly charges will follow. Things can, of course, go belly up. It could be that he lies or commits another crime in the aftermath, or something else falls through. But that will be their intention if, in fact, they enter into a cooperation agreement with Mr. Greenberg this week.
Understood. And that goes to why legally it's a big week. Both of our guests stay. As mentioned, we turn to the other big case here that's also in Trump's orbit, Rudy Giuliani, dealing with the feds going through those phones and computers. Only he and maybe his client Donald Trump know what's on there. Giuliani back at it. He is doing what is becoming a kind of Baroque theater of radio show defense, talking about this case.
I don't know why they're searching my house. I have no idea what they allege I supposedly did, acted as an agent for some Ukrainian. It's just totally untrue. I don't know what they base it on, either their own supposition or some liar. But I can prove that I wasn't. I've offered to come there and prove it.
Giuliani there is basically saying that he doesn't see himself as a foreign agent. That's one of the issues at the case. Now, they're also discussing whether he would go in and talk. He reportedly, though, had conditions attached that he didn't mention on the radio, that he would only show up if given topics ahead of time. U.S. attorney and their investigators said no. Giuliani also going after the feds for how they raided his law office.
Instead, they wanted to break into my house and, worst of all, break into my law office, for which they should be really penalized. I mean, the thing should be suppressed. You should not be allowed to break into a lawyer's office on a charge of one alleged failure to file as a foreign agent.
Danya, as I reminded viewers, you worked in the same office he used to run, the Southern District. I will say, as a student of the Rudy Giuliani public defense, I didn't know that my life would bring me to this role, but I have been studying him now for some time. Today's radio comments strike me as more rational, more rooted in the actual legal fact pattern than a bunch of the other baloney he said. And so I'm happy to get some actual legal content for you to analyze. What do you think of the contention there? That he says if you're only accused of what he views, in his opinion, as a smaller felony, and one could make the argument that obviously the foreign lobbying violation is different than more serious felonies like murder or something very serious. His view is if it's a small felony, maybe you don't have to be searched at all. Is that legally sound?
That's not legally sound. The prosecutors, as long as they have probable cause for a federal offense and can get a judge to sign off on it, in this case as well to get senior DOJ officials to sign off on it, they can get a search warrant. Doesn't matter if it's for a fair offense or for premeditated murder. In point of fact, though, as a practical matter, it may be the case that for a simple technical paperwork violation, they would not go to these lengths. So But he's wrong as a matter of law. He may have other legal defenses, including, whether or not there was in fact probable cause, whether or not an agent testified, improperly in getting the search warrant sworn out. Those may all be legal defenses. But yes, some of the defenses we've seen, the line prosecutors are jealous, or he's being framed, or the whataboutism with Hunter Biden. Neither of these, I don't know about you, Ari, but he also does not seem to be a student of either history or the law, because those are, of course, not real legal defenses.
Yeah, and that seems to be a problem for him, or it's coming out of his emotion. And again, in maximum fairness, he may be speaking more as a frustrated subject of a probe, not as a lawyer. There's a reason why lawyers sometimes need lawyers, because you can't really lawyer for yourself. So his passion's coming through. He has every right to mount his defense. Some of what he's saying doesn't wash. It's not legally sound. You mentioned history, which brings me to the thing I wanted to put to Juanita on the political side. There are all sorts of cases one could draw on to say that perhaps one is on the wrong end of an investigation. I would say Richard Nixon in the popular imagination would be one of the last you would go for as the only person driven from the White House under forcible legal and congressional pressure. And yet, here we have it. Juanita, take a look.
I'm not a crook. I've never been a crook. And I know everybody says it, but I didn't do it, and these people are framing me. And they're framing me because, very simple reason, I got the goods on Joe Biden.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
Juanita, we often turn to you on political communication. Where do you rate this political strategy of consciously or subconsciously aligning himself with one of Richard Nixon's most ignominious statements ever?
I believe he did it consciously, and it's still asinine, Ari. Like, we all know how it turned out for Richard Nixon, but he doesn't see himself as going that same path. It's striking to me that he would invoke Nixon's words saying, I'm not a crook, when the record show, it's likely to show that when feds start to probe through all of the evidence that they took, that there is going to be some potential audio, some communication of him committing crimes. And so it's just really striking to me that he decided to choose that route. I'm not surprised that it was immediately followed by other ridiculous statements, because I feel like Giuliani is fully in a scramble mode right now. And I don't know if this is a plea for help to Trump that's coded like, hey, come save me, come help me, which we know Trump hasn't been there for him at all. But as we know that his attorneys are likely to file motions to prevent investigators from reviewing all of that information, I'm going to be keeping an eye on for whether or not Trump signs on to those motions, because that could be seen as some self-preservation on the part of Trump, but also a glimmer of support for Giuliani, which we know he has not gotten any of to date.
You make a great point that's both the legal and the political, and whether this is one of the people in the Trump orbit that's going to be discarded, like Michael Cohen, who was, of course, the previous lawyer, or whether there may be a bear hug. I mean, Steve Bannon and Donald Trump had a bigger falling out than Giuliani, and in the end, he did get the support. So it is, again, one of these parlor tricks that we'll have to follow. Danya and Juanita, thanks to both of you. I want to give everyone a legal update.